Hey, as these guys are doing, I just want to say one quick thing. Go Cougs. Yeah, look at this. Yeah, I like that you wore your Coug polo right down the center aisle. That's awesome, Cole. Thank you. Yeah, go Cougs. Cougs won yesterday. That's something to celebrate. Yeah, Eagles, I think they have a football team too, but the Cougs won yesterday, and it was fun because my buddy that's in town, we went to a place to watch the game, and midway through the game, my other friend Jason came to join us, and the difference is this. We're sitting in this place, everybody's wearing Coug gear, and Jason is an Oregon State Beaver, and so he shows up with his orange and black on. He's the only guy in orange and black, only guy that looks like a pumpkin in the room. And we did to him what happens to pumpkins. He got smashed, right? He didn't like that joke last service. He thought I was calling him robust. I just said it was just a Halloween-themed thing. No, he's just kidding. But it was funny, and I was kind of laughing, thinking about sports teams and how you can always identify somebody. You know, if we're into sports, if you're into a team, you know you're into a team. And so we're going to actually start today with a little game. And you know who somebody follows based on what they wear. And this is a case in point. Give you a chance to guess this first one. Who does this guy follow? Who is it? Green Bay Packers, right? That's a very unique cheesehead right there, right? Green Bay Packers. How about this one? Arizona Cardinals, right? I used to not be very proud of them. These days things are changing, but yeah, Arizona Cardinals, yeah. People do all kinds of things. How about these guys? The Saints. I loved this picture. I thought that was so creative. Like the bishops cheering for the Saints. I just thought it was kind of a fun thing. So it's really obvious, you can tell who somebody follows based on how they dress. Doesn't just apply to sports, actually applies to religious groups as well. Case in point, check this one out. What religious group? Muslim. How come you guys are whispering? Muslim. You guys go from Green Bay to Muslim. He knows he's Muslim. It's okay. Yeah, so he's Muslim. Yeah. How about this one? What group is this? These guys are Sikhs, right? Sikhs. Which, by the way, a couple of good-looking guys rocking that thing. You have to be good-looking and confident to rock that thing that well, right? Like, that's awesome. Sikhs, there's Sikhism, 5th largest religion in the world and growing today. All right, here's another one. Buddhists, right? I chose this picture because this guy on the end here, he was opening his eyes during prayer. Like, busted, right? Right? So there's this interesting thing, right? So we know we're sports fans based on what we wear. We know maybe what religious group we are because of what we wear. So then the question is, what do Christians wear? Do we wear this? Right? Please no, right? I hope that's not the uniform. How about this? Right? Hipster Christian, right? I have a past, that's what that says. That's a slow burn for some of you. Like, some of you get that on the ride home. How about this one? So I think there's this question as Christians, what do we wear? What are we known for wearing? How do people identify us based on what we're wearing? Do people identify us based on what we're wearing? What should we as Christians be known for? It's actually a question that the Apostle Paul answered in the book of Colossians, this book that we've been looking at in our series, Free to Be. And it's really fascinating, and maybe it should make us a little bit nervous because you think about what maybe they were wearing then. But there is this dynamic of Paul saying, here is what you should wear. Here is what you should be known for. And it's really an emphasis that Paul returns to over and over again as he writes to various churches and groups of Christians. And it's something that he returns to that actually was a part of the teaching of Jesus that Paul seems to revisit over and over again. There was this one particular scene in John chapter 13 when Jesus is having a conversation with his disciples, and he says to them, I'm going to tell you about something that's brand new, something you've never heard of, something that this is going to be revolutionary for you. These are the words that Jesus spoke in John 13, and they're the words that Paul seems to unpack over and over again. He said this, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Now, if you stop right here midway through this verse and you think about Jesus gathering a group of people like this together and saying, I got something new, you should love each other. Most of us and most of them would have listened to that and said, this is not revolutionary. We've been hearing this for a while. We know we're supposed to love each other. Like, We didn't need you to come tell us this. But what's genuinely new and revolutionary about this is what Jesus says in the second half of this verse. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. So it's like Jesus is saying, listen, if you forget everything else that I've told you, all the travels, all the walking on dusty paths, all the things we've done together, you and disciples and I, he's looking at these guys and he's saying, I'm giving you a new commandment. Like it's one of the few times Jesus says, this is a commandment. He says, I'm giving you a commandment, and I say that you're to love one another the way that I have loved you. You do love the way that I have loved you. That's what your responsibility is. He's not saying, I want you to love another the way that you have loved another in the past or way another has loved you. I don't want you to one another the way that you have one another. That's not what Jesus is saying. He's saying, I want you to one another the way that I have one anothered you, the way that I have loved you, the way that I've done this. Some of you are like, what? Jesus is saying, you're not the standard for what it looks like to love one another. I am. So what's he really saying to these guys? It's as if Jesus is saying, listen, Matthew, do you remember when I met you? And if you read the story of Jesus meeting Matthew, it's an amazing story. Because Matthew is a tax collector. He'd obeyed his country. He'd disobeyed his country, disobeyed the people in his faith. He's sitting at a tax collector booth, and Jesus approaches him at a moment when probably his disciples were ready to spit on Matthew, to maybe punish Matthew, to whip Matthew, to do something to Matthew. Jesus comes to Matthew when he is blatantly not believing the right things, not saying the right things, not living his life the right sort of way. Jesus comes to Matthew in that circumstance and says, hey, I know that. I know that you don't believe all the right stuff and think all right, and I know this is true, but would you follow me? He looks at Matthew and he's saying, listen, I want you to love others the way that I loved you, that when you weren't believing right, thinking right, doing right, I still came to you and said, come on, follow me. Or maybe he was looking at Nathanael. Nathanael is who is responsible for saying, what good thing could ever come from Nazareth? And shortly after those words were spoken, despite how confrontational and hurtful they might have been to Jesus, Jesus says, Nathanael, would you come follow me? Would you come, even though you don't really see what good there is in me, would you come follow me? And now he's saying, and would you love others the way that I loved you in that moment? Or like the time when he was preaching and the crowds began to question and people began to wonder and leave Jesus, and his disciples began to waver and doubt, and Jesus continued with them, loving them, not angry with them, but continued in all of their mistakes and brokenness. Jesus said, come on, guys, keep following. Would you love others the way that I have loved you? That's what Jesus says. He says, this is new. I want you to love the way that I have loved. And then he said, this is the part that would impact the Apostle Paul, that would become so much a part of his teaching. Then he goes on, and in verse 35, Jesus says, by this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. In other words, this is the mark. Like, this is the thing that when there's images that pop up in front of people's faces and they say, who does this person follow? They say Jesus because they see love. Like there's such a tangible experience with you that is full of grace and love and compassion that people say, you must be a Christ follower, that the mark that distinguishes you as an individual, the thing that makes people realize you follow Jesus, that they'll look at your life and they'll say, the only way that I could explain who you are and how you behave and how you treat me is that you're a Christ follower. It's the only thing that would make a person do this. That's the one thing that he says we should be known for. That's what we should be wearing. Jesus is looking at these guys and he's saying, this is such a big deal. And the next verse, this funny thing happens where Peter just leaves the subject matter and he goes, well, Lord, where are you going? And if you read it all together in one paragraph, you realize how funny it is. Like Jesus has been talking to them about where he's been going, but now he says, here's this thing I want you to know about. And Peter's like, yeah, I get it. I get that you want me to be loving, but where are you going? And Peter's so caught up in wondering where Jesus is going that he's missing the commandment to love one another and be known for your love for one another. And it's something that we're so much a part of in ourselves. We hear this and we go, yeah, you're right. I didn't come to church today expecting to hear something other than that we should love one another. And yet as soon as we hear this, one of the first things we do is we do what Peter does. Peter wants to get to the geography of his faith, the theology. Like, where are you going, Jesus? I want to know more about this other stuff. I know I'm supposed to love. And there's such a disconnect for him, and there's such a disconnect for us, that we hear these things, and so frequently we begin to move away from what Jesus has just told us to the things that we want to hear. In fact, oftentimes what that drags us towards is religiosity. I've been saying this throughout this series, that our faith has a tendency, has a gravitational pull towards religion, towards rules, towards ritual that is based on our behavior. We do things to somehow make God happy with us, and somehow once we enter into faith, and for some of you, you've walked this out, you know what I'm talking about, you enter into this faith relationship with God through Christ, you receive His grace, you understand His love, and then there is this drift towards rigidity and back towards religion, back towards behaviorism. That's a reality that happens for all of us, and yet it's such a disconnect when we think about what Jesus is commanding us to be known for. Jesus is saying, listen, in no way can you ever allow the way that you obey religious ritual to replace how you treat people. Like, it'll never be acceptable. You can never excuse the way that you talk to people, treat people, think about people based on how much you read your Bible or how frequently you attend church. You can't just say, well, I attend church a lot, and so because of that, I get to mistreat people. No, Jesus says treating people well is what it means to be a Christ follower. In fact, some of you, maybe you kind of wander in on a Sunday like this, and maybe it's been a while, and maybe the reason it's been a while, the reason you're hesitant to be a part of a church is because in your experience, some of the people that maybe knew the most about the Bible, or maybe people that maybe were the most consistent in church, were also some of the meanest people that you ever met. Isn't that an irony? We can know all of it, and we can attend every week, and yet we can still somehow hurt people. Because it's a lot easier for us to check things off the list than it is to love people. It's a lot easier for you and I just to keep going, man, I did this, I did my duty, I feel good about myself, and I feel like I think God's happy with me, and we just keep checking off the list. And that's way easier than becoming the loving person that Christ is calling us to in John 13. So 22 years or so goes by. Jesus has this conversation with the disciples. About 22 years goes by, and we pick up in the book of Colossians, where this guy, Paul, who was not one of the original disciples, has become a Christ follower. Actually, previous to that, he was killing Christians, and then he becomes a Christ follower himself. He experiences his radical transformation, and he starts spending his time traveling the Mediterranean, which sounds romantic and wonderful today, and it was not so much then. Like getting on ships you and I would never get on, taking trips you and I would never see as being fun or romantic or a vacation. The Apostle Paul travels the Mediterranean, and he's telling people about the message of Jesus, telling them about this radical love, exhibiting it to them, and as a result, churches are being formed. These groups of people are gathering, and the church at Colossae is one of these churches. It's about an hour from Ephesus. It was a place of significance. These people have gathered together, and now Paul is writing this church and other churches to coach them and encourage them around what it looks like to really follow Jesus. And specifically, he comes back to, over and over again, you and I being known for our love, being known for what Jesus was talking about in John chapter 13. So the book of Colossians in chapter 3 starts to get really practical, and that's where we've been the past couple of weeks. Paul is moving to a place where it's no longer about here's who Jesus is and here's who you are. Now he's moving to a place of if these things are true, then this is what it looks like for you and I to practically live our faith in the here and now. Last week we left off in verse 10 of chapter 3. We're going to pick up in verse 11 of chapter 3. So if you have your Bible, open it up to that. If you don't have your Bible, the words will be on the screen and you can follow there. In either case, I encourage you to take notes, write things down if something hits you or strikes you. But this is what Paul says as we live this out. Listen to this. He's concerned about what we're known for. He starts with, here there is no Greek, not Greek or Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free. But Christ is all and in all. Now, I have this funny little habit when I'm studying, and sometimes I'll be going through the verses that we're going to look at on a particular weekend, and I'll fixate on certain words. And every now and then I land on a word that I think, why in the world am I focused on this? Sometimes that turns out really bad, because I spend way too much time studying stuff that doesn't ever get said on Sunday morning. And sometimes it's just weird stuff, right? But then sometimes I study on a word, and I'm like, man, I can't believe I settled on this word, but the result of this is something really fascinating when you think about it. And for me, as I was walking through this, there was this one word that I kept getting stuck on, and it's the first word of the first sentence, verse 11, when he says, here. Here. Here there is not Greek or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, or free, but Christ is all and in all. Here. And I couldn't get past this word here. Like here, where is here? When Paul says here, these things are true, is he talking about a location? Is he talking about a room like this? Is he saying, well, in churches when they gather within these four walls, here, these are the things that are true? Is he talking about a city where the gospel had been so prevalent and so active in penetrating people's hearts that things had changed? And so here, maybe in the city that he's writing in, those things are true. Well, probably not, because he was writing from prison, so that's probably not the case. So what's he talking about when he says here? Is this some sort of physical place? The answer is yes. When Paul says here, he's very specifically saying this has to do with geography. This has to do with location. This is a spot that you can find on a GPS and mark a waypoint. Here, there is no Greek nor Jew, circumcised, uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and in all. He says here, this is true. Here, it's a place. It's a location. So what is he talking about? Is this a new place? Yes and no. He's saying this is the same place, but it's also a new place. It's a new place not because the geography has changed, but because of the people that are living in it have been changed. There is a new place, and now in this place, there is a group of people who are living as the new humanity. There's a group of people who are living out new purposes. He's saying here is a new place because we are here. Christ followers are here. He's acknowledging and saying that the texture of cities and the way that neighborhoods feel, they're dramatically shaped and differentiated now because we are here, you are here, and I am here. And that is a new reality. There is a new group of people who now shape what this place is all about. There's this presence of this new group of people who no longer live the way that everybody else lives, nor do they live for the things that everybody else lives for. They live for the purposes of God. They're a population who are breathing and living shalom into communities and wholeness, and they're undoing injustice and they're healing brokenness. That's who these people are. They're living the way that God created them to live, and they're loving the way that God created them to love. That's who this group of people are. They haven't just been rescued from something. These aren't just a group of people who you were broken and a sinner and now we rescued you from hell, but they've been rescued to something. They've been released to live with purpose. And they are the new humanity. We are the new humanity. And we are here. Right in the middle of the place that we always were is this here that Paul is talking about. Where you are is different than the place you used to be because of the new humanity. And what does he say? He says things are radically different here. The first thing he says is there is neither Greek nor Jew. There is neither circumcised nor uncircumcised. There is neither barbarian, Scythian, slave, or free. What he's saying in that moment, he's saying, listen, we've broken ourselves into categories based on the language we speak, the way that we worship, how we dress, our social status, our nationality. And he's saying, in this place, that no longer exists. It's interesting how he starts, because he starts with the group the Greeks wanted to hear this from. This is a church that was probably predominantly Greeks. And so he starts by saying, there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised. And the Greeks probably got excited about this, because they were like, it's about time. Because these Jewish Christians, they feel like they're superior to us, like they've known Jesus longer because they were Jewish. And so there was a sense of superiority, there was conflict, and even some of those Jews were the ones that were bringing about the religious behaviors that Paul was confronting within the variety of churches around the Greek world. And so there was a part of this that felt good, like, yeah, you're right, there is neither Greek nor Jew. We're all the same. And then Paul doesn't contrast the next two. It's not either or. He uses barbarian and Scythian. Barbarians and Scythians. Essentially, this was a group that the Greeks would have known about but didn't really want to talk about. The barbarians were those that weren't Greek. They were the people living in Greek lands who came from other places. They spoke different languages. They had different traditions. They came from different nationalities. These were those that had gathered from around the world, the Roman Empire, and been spread out in all of these different Greek places. And there was a sense of superiority that the Greeks held towards the barbarians. That's why they called them barbarians, right? They were uncivilized, they were uneducated, they were not a part of our culture, and while they accepted them as a necessary evil, they didn't see themselves as being the same. And so while Paul eradicates the division in one hand, he now eradicates it in a way that is a little challenging to these people. Well, there's neither Greek nor barbarian nor Scythian. You know, what's a Scythian? A Scythian was a person who was one step lower than a barbarian, if there could be such a thing, right? Next time you're mad at somebody, you can just under your breath say, Scythian. And it's such a good word to say. What did you say? I called you a Scythian. What does that even mean? It means you were one step up from a dog. That's what a Scythian was. Scythians were the individuals of the barbarians. They were the roughest of the barbarians. They were the most primitive of the people in the known world. They were Scythians. And then he moves even further and he says, nor slave nor free. Slaves were property. They weren't even considered people. And now he says, it doesn't matter if you're property. It doesn't matter if you're a Scythian, a barbarian, a Greek, or a Jew. There is an equality to be experienced. You've been dividing yourself up. You could look at yourselves and say who you were based on what you wore because you were a Greek, and everybody knew you were Greek because of what you were wearing, and everybody knew you were a Jew because of what you were wearing, and a barbarian, and a Scythian, and a slave. Everybody could be identified because of what they wore. And now Paul says all of these distinctions, they're eradicated, and now there is an equality. Why? Because Christ is all and is in all. And so while you may speak different languages and come from different backgrounds and have different histories, you all are together in the new humanity because you all are in Christ. When you understand that, the words that come next in verse 12 make all the sense in the world, because now it's no longer about being known for what I put on in the morning as a Greek or a Jew or a Scythian or a slave. Now it's about what I put on as a Christ follower. And so in the same way that these individuals would have been known for their apparel and for their dress, now Paul moves and shifts the conversation and says, if you are the new humanity, if this is true of who you are, then this is what you put on every day when you walk out your door. And so he continues, and he says in verse 12, put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts. That's where he begins. He uses this beautiful illustration of putting this on. Get dressed the way you get dressed every day. But now, as a member of the new humanity, put on compassionate hearts. It's interesting, this phrase, compassionate hearts, there's two Greek words that get translated into compassionate hearts. That should be no surprise. What's interesting is the way that those Greek words are really expressed in Greek culture are radically different than compassionate hearts. So Paul's going to unpack what it looks like to love, and he says, well, if you're going to really love, if you're going to really be known for love, then you should have a compassionate heart. And that sounds a lot like you and I loving somebody with all of our heart. You hear that phrase, like, I love you with all of my heart, like I love you with everything that's inside of me, right? Like, you get that? Anyone ever heard that? Okay. Anyone ever written that in a card? Yeah, a few of you, right? Here's what you don't write in a card. You don't write what Paul was really saying. Because the Greek words that are used here actually say that you love from your bowels. Truly, that's what the love is. It's this love from your bowels. That doesn't sell for Hallmark, right? Like, baby, I love you with all of my bowels, right? And she's like, and that's exactly why I don't love you, because of your bowels, right? Some of you get that one on the way home too. But there's this idea of feeling it. You know what it's like to feel something in your bowels? Like something happens and you feel it in your bowels. It's something that makes you sick. You identify there's something in your stomach. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like somebody goes through something and it is so painful and so dark and so difficult that you find yourself aching with them. My friends Anthony and Stephanie that have been hanging out with us the past couple of days, we were talking about it after the last service. That's what I felt when I found out they lost their son. There was this aching in my bowels. There was this sickness that was inside of me. Like, man, I can't imagine living in that place. That's what Paul is talking about. He's saying, put on compassionate hearts. Put yourself in a place where you identify so closely with the angst that somebody is going through, the disappointment that somebody is going through, the frustration, the brokenness, whatever it is. Put yourself so much in their shoes that as they share those things with you, you ache with them. There is something in your bowels that churns because of what they're going through. That's something we put on because our natural response is to outline why things could be or should be different. Maybe not in the case of a tragedy, but in so many other cases when somebody comes and they say, man, I can't believe that this decision I made worked out poorly. I can't believe I got this grade in a math test. I can't believe that my car broke down or whatever it is. There's a tendency inside of humanity when it's those kinds of things to just go right to the I told you so's, right? Like some of you as parents, you know what this experience is like. Your kids come and they say, I can't believe I got this bad of a grade. And we go, well, it doesn't surprise me because you never studied all year long, right? And we want to say, well, I told you. And our natural response is to point, well, hey, listen, I understand the circumstances of this relationship bottomed out. And you have that friend and you watch them and you say, but there's a part of you that wants to rise up and say, well, do you remember 6 or 7 months ago when I sat you down for coffee and I tried to warn you, right? I tried to tell you that he was no good, right? Like we want to go there first. And what Paul is saying, don't go there first. Get in their circumstances. Identify with them. Don't justify the reasons for just dumping your truth bucket on them in the moment. Be known for a compassionate heart. Feel what they're going through in this moment. I want you to put this on. I want you to wear compassion. And then he goes on and he adds another one. He says kindness. I want you to put on compassion, and I want you to put on kindness. And do you know what kindness is? Kindness is when you leverage your strength for somebody else. Kindness is when you loan your strength to somebody else. Kindness is when somebody else is in a circumstance, and you step in a way that only you could, and you help them out. That's kindness. Kindness isn't talking nice. Think about when you say somebody's kind. Oh man, that guy's really kind. Such a kind person. Is it just because they talk nice? No, usually it's somebody who has used their resources, their power, their strength, their ability, and they've used those things and they've leveraged it for you for some reason. That's what kindness is. It's leveraging your strength, your ability for somebody else's need. And Paul says, listen, I want you to develop this new habit, this new approach to life where you loan yourself to others for their good. And then he continues, put on compassionate hearts, put on kindness, put on humility. Humility is one of those words we really mess up in our world today. We have a great sense of false humility. Sometimes we just totally misunderstand humility. Humility is a word that truly is supposed to be applied to how we approach other people. And in this context, what Paul is saying is that there's an accurate view of who we are in relationship to others. That's what humility is. Humility means we see ourselves clearly in the context of humanity. We have a clear sense of who we are and who others are as human beings. There's this understanding that we are a particular sort of person in view of God, and so are they. What I'm getting at is that what we oftentimes think makes us special isn't what makes us special. Sometimes we like to chalk it up to maybe the achievements that we've made or the money that we've earned or the goals that we've reached. We like to think that those are the things that make us who we are, and then we walk humbly in light of those things, and we say, well, what actually makes us who we are is the love of God and His grace in our life. That's what makes us the people that we are. And what that means is the very thing that makes me special is also present in you. And so humility is about me recognizing and realizing that you are just as loved by God as I am. You're just as cared for. You're just as meaningful to him as I am. And so humility is me not trying to pump you up or pump me down artificially, but humility is me recognizing that both of us are loved by God and equally cared for and equally extended grace. That's what humility is. Exude that kind of humility. And then he continues. Put on compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, and meekness. Another word for meekness is gentleness. Meekness is the decision to respond in light of your strength and weakness rather than responding out of my strength and weakness. That's what meekness is all about. Let me say that again. If I'm a meek individual, if you're a meek individual, if meekness is something, which by the way, guys, we love this. This sounds so manly, right? I'm really meek. What are you working on these days? I'm just working on my meekness muscles, like in the gym. But meekness says that I'm responding not based on my strength, not based on my weakness, but I'm responding based on your strength or your weakness. It means I'm adjusting my strengths to meet you where you are. It means that my response to circumstances and situations is not based on how good I am or how bad I am, but it's all being adapted to and adjusted to you. Meekness is my decision to respond to you in light of your strength and weakness rather than my own. It's putting you first and adjusting appropriately. My buddy Anthony, who's in town with me, back when we used to work in an office together, we used to wrestle. We were much younger. We were youth pastors. We blew through doorways and broke things and smashed holes in walls, and I never really want to do that again. I don't like wrestling. It's not fun. I just want to punch people when they wrestle me. And yesterday, to bring back old memories, Anthony jumped me in my basement. Anthony's scrawny compared to me. He can barely put his arms around me. He kicked my butt. Like, literally, his wife was taking video, watching this whole thing, while our children watched us, and my girls are saying, "Dad, get up." And I'm like, I'm trying to get up. Like, this isn't easy. He's got me down here, and so we're wrestling later on. I was like licking my wounds. He's like, "Are you okay, buddy? Are you okay?" I'm like, "Get out of here." He worked me over, and I was shocked. I was like, "You got a lot of strength in that little body of yours. Like, where does that come from?" And he's like, "Well, I'm not as strong as I used to be." I'm like, "Thanks for rubbing it in. I appreciate that," because apparently I'm way not as strong as I used to be. And so we were messing around, and I was really kind of shocked and surprised at how weak I am. And then we went to the park. We took the kids to the park, out to Manitou. We set some cones up, and we were playing soccer and climbing in trees and doing that sort of thing. And his oldest son, he got something in his eye. And here's my buddy who just a little bit earlier got done kicking my butt in the basement. Now I see him over with his son, and he's kneeled down. And his wife, they've got him over there, over his knee, and he's kneeled down. And with all the gentleness in the world, he's just barely touching his eye. He's trying to find whatever this thing is. He's prying his eyelid open, and so carefully he's attempting to deal with this issue. And as I was watching that, I realized, is that not a picture of meekness? I respond to circumstances not based on my strength, but I respond to circumstances based on what that situation requires. And so if I'm dealing with you in any capacity, it means I'm coming alongside of you, and I don't need to prove my superiority or my strength, unless we're wrestling, then that's different. But I need to adjust for your weakness. Paul says, do you put other people first in that sort of way? That's what you put on every day. You say, man, I want to put other people first. I don't need to prove to people how strong I am. I can actually meet them where they need me to meet them. My relationship is worth me adjusting for. And then he says this, which ties right into meekness, patience. Put on as this new humanity compassionate hearts and kindness and humility and meekness and patience. I love the word patience, and here's why. It assumes that there's a reason that we need to be patient. You know what I'm saying? Like, patience means somebody has done something to frustrate you. You can't be patient in your world if everybody is perfect all the time. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like when he says patience, you know what he's doing? He's simultaneously identifying the reality that people are going to mess things up. They're going to do things that frustrate you. They're going to forget where they put the keys. They're going to lose things. They're not going to show up on time. They're going to say things that are hurtful. They're going to do things that wound you. The assumption when he says put on patience is that you are living in a world full of people who will not meet your expectations. And you're not going to meet theirs either, which is also encouraging too, right? Patience assumes this. Not only does patience assume that there's a reason to be patient, that people are imperfect and make mistakes and that they're broken, but there's also a speed dynamic to this thing. There's a rate of growth dynamic to this. Patience means that people aren't moving as fast as we would like them to move. So the picture that's painted when we use the word patience is that there's somebody who's at a particular point or place in time. Maybe it's emotionally, maybe it's physically, maybe it's spiritually, and they're at this particular place, and suddenly they make a decision or a mistake or they do something, and you find yourself at some other point saying, "What are you doing over there? You should be here right now. Like, you shouldn't be behaving this way emotionally. You shouldn't be behaving this way spiritually. You shouldn't be doing these things. You need to be here." There's a speed dynamic where our expectations are being laid upon others, and what we're attempting to do when we're impatient is to say, "Listen, you don't belong here. Get up here," and we slam them up where we are. And what Paul says is there is a sense of us putting on patience where we look at people who are spiritually not where we would like them to be, or emotionally or relationally not where we wish they were, whatever it may be, whatever capacity. We look at them, and rather than us trying to rush them to the point where they meet our expectations, we find ourselves walking back to join them and to join them in the journey forward as they move down the road. We put on patience. We look at people with a whole new perspective, and again, we find ourselves going to them and meeting them where they are at. We slow down and exhibit patience. I love this quote, and I came across it last week, and I don't know who said it because I didn't write it down. So last service, a bunch of people asked me for it, and I said, "I don't know who said it," but I knew I couldn't take credit for it. So here's a quote that I found last week, and I loved it. "You can't sanitize grace. You can't stuff it into a blue blazer and make it wear khakis. Grace is messy, offensive, and it sometimes misses church. To expect God to pump prefabricated plastic moral people out of a religious factory is to neuter grace and chain it inside a gated community. If God's scandalous relationship with the 12 thugs means anything, then we should expect a variegated spectrum of righteousness and be patient or repentant when such sanctification doesn't meet our expectations. God meets us in our mess and pushes holiness out the other side, not anti-mixed bathing holiness, but the real stuff. The holiness that serves the poor, prays without ceasing, redeems the arts, loves enemies, elevates community above corporate success, and preaches the life-giving gospel of a crucified and risen Lamb in season and out." That is what he's telling us to put on. And then he continues with these phrases that are linked together. In verse 13, he says, "You bear with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, you must also forgive. As the Lord has done it for you, you do it for others." One another. You don't do for one another what you've done for one another. You do for one another what he has done for one another. Paul brings it back to this. And then he says, above all, over all of this, put on love. Verse 14, above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Some of you may say, this is exactly what I expect to hear in church, that I should be loving and compassionate, and I'm not surprised at all. And that's probably a good thing to hear in church, right? But you don't know my life and all the stuff that I've got to get done the rest of the day and tomorrow, right? There's a part of you that hears this and you think, well, if I'm really this compassionate and if I really, really care deeply in my bowels and if I'm that patient and if I'm that meek and I do all these different things, I'm probably not going to get anything done, right? Because we need to be honest. Like, I'm going to be honest. Like, as much as we all expect this to be a message we hear in church, I think we also need to be honest and say, the tension in this is, well, then how do you go out and live the life we're supposed to live tomorrow? And where I find credibility in this is the guy that wrote it. Because here's a guy who was about as type A as a human being could be. And he did things we're still talking about 2,000 years later. We are still remembering him because he jumped on crazy ships and he went to crazy places and he said things he shouldn't have said in front of leaders. He did all of these outlandish things. He did this, and he did it all through the transformation that he's preaching here. He became a new person. He put on these things, and he made a difference. And that's what this is about. Jesus didn't come so that he could make a point. If Jesus wanted to make a point, if that's what this was about, and if that's what all these writings were about, Jesus could have made a point in like 15 minutes or less. Jesus came to make a difference. That's what he came to do. And he left his church here to make a difference, not a point. He came that we would make a difference, that you and I would make a difference. And the way that that difference is made, the way that that happens in our culture, the way that difference happens in our city, the way that difference happens on our campuses, the way that happens in our relationship, the way that difference is made in your friendships, and the way that difference is made in your homes and in the places where we eat and sleep, all these, where the difference happens is not when we decide we're going to make a point about Jesus, but it happens when we become the kind of people in whom others sense genuine compassion. And they say, I can't believe you cared about me the way that you cared about me. Difference happens when there's this extraordinary kindness where we leverage our abilities and strengths for the things that other people need. When people experience meekness, this adaptation on our part, when they experience and see genuine humility, when they receive our patience, that is when a difference is made. When we love people the way that Jesus loved people, that is when the difference is made, and that's what we're to wear. And no, it doesn't come easy. If it did, we wouldn't be telling you to put it on, right? Paul wouldn't be saying, put this on. We have to continually do this. Jesus wouldn't have called it a new commandment if it was something we just did naturally. But Paul brings us back to the gospel because the gospel is what allows us to be the people who can do this. We come back to these things and we remind ourselves in the same way that I was shown compassion and kindness, the same way that I was shown grace and mercy and forgiveness, in the same way that I was extended humility and patience, I extend that to others. And the result of our living our lives that way is not that we lose our identity. See, when we become the new humanity, there's this thing inside of us that says, well, if I do this, if I lose my life for this, then I lose my life for this. And there's nothing that's further than the truth. And I know there may be some anxieties. You say, no, I've got to fight for my rights. I've got to do these things. But Paul says this in verse 15. He says, when you live this way, here's what happens. And the peace of Christ, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. You living as a loving person not only makes a difference in the world around you, but it makes you the kind of person who tangibly experiences the peace of Christ. That's what we wear. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you would challenge us, that you would use these words to reveal to us those places where we've justified not treating people well. The divisions, the barriers, the behaviors, the things that we've said, you know what, I don't have to love that person. I pray that you would challenge us to be the most loving, not just because of the love, but because of the difference that you've called us to make. I pray that you'd allow us to see that when we love, we transform homes and communities and campuses and relationships. Lord, I pray that you'd give us the strength and the ability to overcome that selfishness inside of us that says, I need to fight for my rights, I need to put up a stand, and I pray that you'd allow us to openly begin to live out this life of the new humanity, that here, where we are, there would be neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, barbarian or Scythian, that we would live this out together. We pray in your name. Amen.